They say the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. But in the high-stakes world of billion-dollar mergers, the most dangerous person isn't the CEO shouting orders or the lawyer waving a contract. Sometimes the most dangerous person is the one nobody looks at. The one refilling the water glasses. Damien Cross was the kind of man who thought he owned the world, and for a long time he did. He had the money, the power, and the arrogance to match. But on a rainy Tuesday in Manhattan, he made the biggest mistake of his career. He laughed at a waitress named Cassidy. He thought she was nobody. He thought she was just the help. He didn't know that she held the key to saving his life and destroying his empire until he checked one tiny, terrifying detail on the back of a napkin. And by then it was almost too late. The rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the gilded grid Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouse, but inside the air was dry cool and smelled of aged leather and truffle oil. At the center table, Table 1 naturally sat Damien Cross. At 38, Damien was the CEO of Cross Global Logistics, a shipping empire that moved everything from microchips to military hardware. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, steel-gray eyes, a jawline that could cut glass, and a bespoke navy suit that cost more than most people's cars. Tonight was the night. He was acquiring Arrogance, a struggling competitor. It was a hostile takeover, disguised as a mercy killing. "Sign the papers, Bennett, and put yourself out of your misery," Damien said, sliding a thick document across the mahogany table. Across from him sat Bennett Street, John, the aging CEO of Arrogance. Bennett looked tired. His hands shook slightly as he reached for his scotch. Flanking Damien were his own sharks, his CFO, a slick man named Greg Pinter, and his lead counsel, a woman named Victoria, who checked her watch every 30 seconds. Hovering at the edge of the table, invisible to the titans of industry, was Cassidy Miller. Cassidy was 27, though her eyes looked older. She wore the standard uniform, a crisp white button-down, a black vest, and black slacks. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight, sensible bun. To the people at Table 1, she was a ghost, a pair of floating hands that replaced empty wine glasses and swept away crumbs. But Cassidy wasn't just watching the wine glasses. She was listening. "The valuation is set at $4.2 billion, Greg Pinter said, his voice oily with satisfaction. "We've absorbed your debt liabilities in the South Asian sector. Honestly, Bennett Damien is being generous. If you wait another quarter, the bankruptcy courts will pick your carcass clean." Bennett sighed, defeated. "The South Asian liabilities. I still don't understand how they ballooned so quickly. We were solvent in Singapore last year." "Market volatility," Damien said dismissively, checking a notification on his phone. "It happens. We're offering you a parachute. Take it." Cassidy stepped forward to pour still water into Damien's crystal glass. As she tipped the pitcher, her eyes darted to the open file folder in front of Greg Pinter. It was a balance sheet. Row 44, column C. Asset depreciations / shell holding, Orion 7. Cassidy's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that name. Orion 7. It wasn't just a random shell company. It was a specific illegal routing code used for phantom freight shipping containers that didn't exist, used to inflate debt artificially. She froze. The water poured a fraction of a second too long, nearly brimming over the rim of Damien's glass. "Easy!" Damien snapped, recoiling, as a single drop splashed onto the tablecloth. He looked up at her, his eyes cold and annoyed. "Are you sleeping standing up? Watch what you're doing?" I apologize, sir," Cassidy said, her voice low. She grabbed a cloth to dab the microscopic spot. Just leave the bottle, Damien muttered, waving her away like a fly. Greg, show him the signature page. Cassidy stepped back, clutching her serving tray. She needed to walk away. She needed to go to the kitchen, pick up the orders for table 4, and forget what she saw. She was a waitress. She was barely making rent on her studio apartment in Queens. She couldn't afford trouble. But she looked at Bennett Street John. He reminded her of her father, a good man being eaten alive by sharks. She knew exactly what Damien Cross and his CFO were doing. They weren't just buying Bennett's company. They had sabotaged it first to lower the price. That code Orion 7 was the smoking gun. If she stayed silent, Bennett would lose everything, and Damien would win by fraud. Cassidy took a breath. It was a breath that would cost her this job. She knew that. But the silence was heavier than the tray in her hand. She stepped back to the table. "Excuse me," she said. The table went silent. Damien didn't look up. Greg Pinter frowned. Victoria the lawyer looked confused. "I said," Cassidy repeated her voice, trembling slightly but gaining strength. "Excuse me, Mr. Cross." Damien finally raised his head, an amused smirk playing on his lips. "We didn't order dessert, sweetheart. Check needs to wait." "It's not about the check," Cassidy said. She pointed a finger, a severe breach of etiquette, at the document in front of Greg. "It's about row 44, the Orion 7 ledger." Greg Pinter slammed the folder shut instantly. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the quiet room. "What do you think you're doing?" Greg hissed. Damien looked at Greg's reaction, then back to Cassidy. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. No, Greg. Let her speak. This should be entertaining. The waitress wants to give us financial advice." He looked at his entourage. "Maybe she thinks we tipped too low on the tax bracket." The table erupted in laughter. Cruel, hollow laughter. Bennett Street John didn't laugh, but he looked away, embarrassed for her. "Go ahead," Damien said, gesturing with his fork. "Enlighten us. What is Orion 7A sandwich special?" Cassidy didn't flinch at the laughter. She had been humiliated by men richer and smarter than Damien Cross before. She locked eyes with the CEO. "It's not a sandwich," Cassidy said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly professional timbre. "Orion 7 is a legacy code for high-yield phantom freight derivatives. It's used to hide profit, not debt. If that line item is in Mr. St. John's liability column, it means someone moved his company's own assets into a shell corporation to make him look broke." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of polite waiting. It was the silence of a bomb counting down. Greg Pinter's face went pale. "She's crazy. She's just reading nonsense words she saw on TikTok." "Am I?" Cassidy challenged. She turned to Bennett. "Sir, did you authorize a transfer of assets to a holding firm in the Cayman Islands on February 14th? Because that's when the Orion 7 code generates its yield." Bennett looked stunned. "February 14th number. That was the day our server network went down for maintenance." "Exactly," Cassidy said. "They moved your money while you were blind, labeled it as toxic debt, and now they're buying your company with your own stolen capital." Damien Cross stopped swirling his wine. His eyes narrowed. He looked at Cassidy, really looked at her for the first time. He saw the scuffed shoes, the cheap uniform, the stray hair falling from her bun. But he also saw her eyes. They were calculating, intelligent. Then his ego took over. He stood up, towering over her. "That is quite a story. Did you write that in your screenwriting class? Or is this a shakedown?" "It's the truth," Cassidy said. Damien laughed again, but it was forced this time. "You're a waitress. You carry plates. You pour water. Do not presume to understand international forensic accounting because you watched a documentary once." He turned to the maître d', who was rushing over looking terrified. "Pierre," Damien said, his voice dripping with venom. "Get this woman out of my sight. She's harassing my guests, and ensure she never works in this city again." "Right away, Mr. Cross. I am so sorry," Pierre stammered. He grabbed Cassidy's arm roughly. "Cassidy Kitchen, now! You're done!" Cassidy yanked her arm free. She looked Damien dead in the eye. "You can fire me," she said, "but check the footnote on page 42. Look at the signatory for the Orion transfer. It's not Bennett's signature." "Get out!" Damien roared, losing his cool. Cassidy turned and walked away. She didn't run. She walked with a straight spine, passing the gawking patrons, pushing through the swinging kitchen doors and out into the alleyway rain. She was unemployed. Again. Back at the table, the mood had soured. "Ridiculous," Greg Pinter said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just a disgruntled employee. Bennett, let's sign." Bennett St. John hesitated. "Maybe. Maybe we should review the liabilities one more time, just to be safe." Damien slammed his hand on the table. "We are not delaying a $4 billion merger because a waitress had a hallucination. Sign the damn papers, Bennett or I pull the offer and you lose everything by morning." Under the immense pressure, Bennett crumbled. He signed. The dinner ended abruptly. Damien Cross walked out to his waiting limousine, his umbrella holder shielding him from the storm. He felt victorious, but a strange itch nagged at the back of his mind. Phantom Freight, Orion 7, February 14th, specifics. Those were very specific lies. He climbed into the back of the Maybach. "Office," he barked at the driver. "Sir, it's 10 p.m., his driver said. "I said the office." Damien sat in the dark leather seat. He pulled the merger file out of his briefcase. He shouldn't care. He had won. He owned Aero Vance now. But Damien Cross hadn't become a billionaire by ignoring details. He turned to page 42. He scanned the footnotes. Tiny text barely legible without reading glasses, which he refused to wear. He squinted. Footnote 4B liability transfer, authorized by holding proxy. He looked for the signatory. It wasn't a name. It was a digital key, ID. Auth G. Pinter, 88. Damien felt a cold chill run down his spine. G. Pinter, Greg Pinter, his own CFO. If Cassidy was right, Greg hadn't just screwed Bennett St. John. By hiding the assets in an illegal shell company under the Cross Global banner, Greg had technically made Damien liable for massive federal fraud. If the SEC saw this, Damien wouldn't just lose money. He would go to federal prison. "Stop the car," Damien whispered. "Sir!" "Turn around!" Damien shouted. "Go back to the restaurant." The Maître d' Pierre was counting cash at the podium when Damien Cross burst back through the front doors, soaking wet his expensive suit ruined by the rain. Pierre jumped. "Mr. Cross, did you forget something I can check under the table? The girl," Damien demanded, breathless. "The waitress. Where is she?" Pierre looked confused. "Cassidy, I fired her, sir. Just as you asked. She's gone." "Where does she live?" I don't give out employee information, sir. It's against policy." Damien slammed his hand on the podium. "I just bought a company for $4 billion tonight, Pierre. I can buy this building and turn it into a parking lot by tomorrow morning. Give me her address." Pierre scrambled for the employee file. Okay. Miller. Cassidy Miller. She lives in Queens. 402 East Elm Apartment 4B. Damien snatched the piece of paper. He turned to leave but paused. "Why was she working here?" Damien asked. "She's not a waitress. Nobody who speaks like that is just a waitress." Pierre shrugged. "She's quiet, keeps to herself. I think she had a gap in her resume. A big one. 2 years. Nobody else would hire her." Damien ran back to his car. The drive to Queens took 40 minutes. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour. The neighborhood deteriorated as the sleek Maybach navigated potholes and narrow streets lined with overflowing trash cans. They pulled up to a brick tenement building that looked like it had been condemned in the 90s. "Wait here," Damien told his driver. He climbed the 4 flights of stairs, the smell of stale smoke and boiled cabbage filling the hallway. He reached apartment 4B. The door was peeling green paint. He knocked. No answer. He knocked harder. "Cassidy, it's Damien Cross. Open the door." Nothing. He tried the knob. It was locked. He put his ear to the door. Silence. Suddenly the door to apartment 4A creaked open. An elderly woman in a bathrobe peered out holding a cat. "She's gone, honey," the woman rasped. Damien turned. Gone, where?" "Left about 20 minutes ago. Packed 2 bags. Said she had to get out of town before the suits came looking for her. Said she knew too much." Damien's stomach dropped. She was running. She thought he was coming to silence her. "Did she say where?" Damien pleaded. "Bus station," the woman said. "Port Authority. She's taking the midnight bus to Chicago." Damien checked his Rolex. It was 11:45 p.m. He had 15 minutes to catch her. If she got on that bus, she disappeared. And if she disappeared, Greg Pinter would get away with the fraud, and Damien would be left holding the bag for a federal crime that would put him away for 20 years. He sprinted down the stairs, slipping on the wet steps, scrambling to the car. Port Authority. He screamed at the driver. "Drive like you stole it." The Maybach roared to life, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. Damien Cross, the master of the universe, was now in a desperate race against time to find the one woman he had laughed at, the woman who held his life in her hands. But as the car wove through traffic, Damien's phone buzzed. It was a text message from Greg Pinter. "Deal signed. Celebrating. By the way, heard you went back to the restaurant. Everything okay?" Damien stared at the screen. Greg knew. Greg was watching him. This wasn't just a financial error anymore. This was a war, and Damien was unarmed. He needed Cassidy. He didn't just need her to explain the numbers. He needed her to help him survive what was coming. Port Authority bus terminal at midnight was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and lost souls. It smelled of diesel fumes, floor wax, and despair. Damien Cross burst through the sliding glass doors, his chest heaving. His Italian leather shoes slipped on the grimy linoleum. He looked wild hair plastered to his forehead, tie-undone eyes darting frantically across the departures board. Gate 42, Chicago. Departs, 12 a.m. It was 11:56 p.m. He sprinted. He dodged a janitor pushing a mop bucket, leaped over a sleeping backpacker, and shoved past a group of confused tourists. He wasn't the CEO of Cross Global Logistics anymore. He was a desperate man chasing a ghost. He reached gate 42 just as the line of passengers was shuffling toward the bus door. "Cassidy!" He shouted, his voice cracking. Several heads turned. A security guard placed a hand on his baton. But Damien only had eyes for the figure near the front of the line. She was wearing a violently orange oversized hoodie and a beanie clutching a duffel bag. It was a disguise, but he recognized the posture, the stiff, defensive spine of someone expecting a blow. She froze. She didn't turn around. She just handed her ticket to the driver. Damien lunged forward, grabbing the metal railing. "Cassidy, don't get on that bus!" She finally turned. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, looking younger, but more exhausted than she had at the restaurant. Her eyes widened in genuine fear. "Get away from me," she hissed, backing up toward the open bus door. "I'm not going back. I won't let you frame me for this." "Frame you?" Damien stopped holding his hands up in surrender. No, listen to me. I checked the file. I checked the signature. The passengers were staring. The bus driver frowned. "Hey, buddy, you got a ticket, if not, back off." "I don't need a ticket," Damien panted, staring at Cassidy. "I need her. She's the only one who knows the code." Cassidy stepped onto the first step of the bus. "I told you what you needed to know. Greg Pinter is stealing your company. You have the info. Leave me alone." "I can't prove it," Damien yelled. The desperation in his voice made the room go quiet. He used a ghost key, Orion 7. I looked it up. It's encrypted. Without the decryption key, it looks like a standard loss. If I go to the board tomorrow, Greg will say I authorized it. I'll go to prison, Cassidy. Me, not him. He walked closer, ignoring the driver's protests. "You saw the look on Greg's face. He knows I know. If you leave, he wins. He destroys Aerovance, he destroys my company, and he walks away with $200 million while I rot in a cell." Cassidy hesitated. Her hand gripped the railing of the bus door so hard her knuckles turned white. "Why should I care?" she asked quietly. "You laughed at me. You treated me like furniture." "I know," Damien said. He dropped his hands. He looked defeated. "I was an arrogant prick. I looked at you, and I saw a uniform, not a person. I was wrong. I am begging you, not as a CEO, but as a man who is about to lose his entire life." The bus driver revved the engine. "Lady, you in or out?" We got a schedule. Cassidy looked at the dark interior of the bus safety anonymity escape. Then she looked at Damien Cross, the master of the universe, standing in a dirty bus terminal, shivering in a wet suit, looking terrified. She sighed a sound of immense frustration. She stepped back down off the bus. "You have a car?" she asked. Damien nodded vigorously. "Outside." "We need to go. Now," she said, scanning the terminal. "Because Greg Pinter isn't just a thief, Mr. Cross. He's careful. And if he knows you came after me, he sent someone to make sure neither of us talks." As if on cue, two men in dark windbreakers pushed through the terminal doors 50 feet away. They weren't police. They scanned the crowd with professional precision. Cassidy grabbed Damien's hand. "Run!" They lost the tail by cutting through the subway station and doubling back to the Maybach. Damien's driver, a stoic ex-Marine named Frank, drove them not to Damien's penthouse, but to a safe location Damien kept for sensitive negotiations, a nondescript brownstone in Brooklyn with bulletproof glass and a private server node. Inside, the air was stale. Damien poured 2 glasses of brandy. His hands were still shaking. Cassidy ignored the drink. She immediately went to the computer terminal on the desk, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She wasn't acting like a waitress anymore. She moved with the authority of a general. "How do you know all of this?" Damien asked, watching her. "The codes, the routing numbers. You're not just smart, you're trained." Cassidy stopped typing. She didn't look up. "My name isn't Cassidy Miller." Damien paused. "Who are you?" "My name is Catherine Hale." Damien frowned. The name sounded familiar. "Hale. Wait. The auditor. The one from the Sterling Voss scandal 3 years ago." "That's the one," she said bitterly. "I was the lead forensic accountant for Sterling Voss. I found a $1 billion hole in their ledger. A phantom account, siphoning money into offshore shells. I tried to report it." She finally looked at him. The CFO of Sterling Voss was a man named Gregory Pinter. Damien's glass hit the table with a clatter. Greg worked at Sterling. His resume said he was consulting in Europe. "He lied," Cassidy Catherine said. "He erased his tenure there. When I tried to blow the whistle, he planted evidence on my laptop. Made it look like I was the one embezzling. He destroyed my reputation, got my CPA license revoked, and threatened my family. I had to disappear. I've been waiting tables for 2 years, waiting for him to slip up, waiting for him to use the Orion 7 code again. She turned the monitor toward Damien. And tonight he did. On the screen was a complex web of transactions. He's getting sloppy, Catherine said. He thinks he's untouchable because he has you as a shield. He's using your digital signature to authorize the transfers. By 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, when the market opens, the Aero-Vance merger finalizes. Once that happens, the debt becomes real. Cross-Global Logistics will technically be insolvent. Greg will short the stock, make a fortune on the crash, and leave you to explain why you bought a bankrupt company. Damien felt sick. He had trusted Greg. He had played golf with the man. They had spent Christmases together. So how do we stop him? Damien asked. We call the FBI. No time, Catherine said. The FBI takes days to issue a warrant. By then, Greg will have wiped the servers. We need to stop the transaction before the market opens. How? We need the physical encryption key, Catherine said. The Orion protocol requires a 2-factor hardware authentication for any transfer over $1 billion. Greg has one key. The system has the other. Where is the system key? Damien asked. It's in the master server, Catherine said. Inside your office. Damien let out a hollow laugh. My office, which is currently locked down. I tried to log in on my phone in the car. My credentials have been suspended. Security breach, it said. Greg has locked me out of my own building. Of course he has, Catherine said. She stood up, pulling the beanie off her head. Her hair fell loose, framing a face that was no longer afraid. It was fierce. He thinks he's playing chess, she said. But he forgot one thing. What's that? He designed the security system to keep you out, she said. He didn't design it to keep me out. I spent 6 months auditing his systems at Sterling. I know his architecture better than he does. I know the back doors he leaves open for himself. She looked at Damien. Mr. Cross, do you trust me? Damien looked at the woman he had humiliated hours ago. The woman who was now the only thing standing between him and total ruin. Yes, he said. Good, she said. Then take off that suit. We're going to break into Cross-Global Tower, and we're going to do it the way the Help does. The Cross-Global Tower did not look like an office building at 3 o'clock in the morning. Rising 60 stories into the rain-slicked Manhattan night, it looked like a fortress of black glass and steel, a monolith that whispered power to the empty streets below. To Damien Cross, this building was his kingdom. He knew the square footage of every floor, the cost of the marble in the lobby, and the exact shade of blue used in the branding. But tonight, huddled in the passenger seat of a rusted white delivery van that smelled of stale cigarettes and engine grease, he felt like a stranger at the gates. He tugged at the collar of his disguise, a grey, oil-stained maintenance jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. Stop fidgeting, Catherine said. She was behind the wheel, her eyes locked on the service entrance gate. She wore a matching jumpsuit, her hair tucked under a faded navy baseball cap. She didn't look like a waitress, and she certainly didn't look like a terrified fugitive. She looked like a woman on a mission. You look guilty. Maintenance guys don't look guilty. They look bored. I don't feel bored, Damien whispered, his heart thudding against his ribs. I feel like I'm breaking into my own house. Technically, Catherine said, shifting the van into gear, you are. But right now, Greg Pinter holds the keys. Remember the play. We aren't hackers. We aren't executives. We are pest control. Invisible. Essential. Ignored. She rolled the van up to the security booth. The guard inside was a heavy-set man Damien didn't recognize, likely a night shift contractor. He was watching a football game on a tablet blue light flickering on his face. He slid the window open, eyeing the van with suspicion. "Delivery dock is closed, pal. Come back at 6 a.m. Catherine didn't flinch. She leaned across Damien, popping a piece of chewing gum loudly. "Not a delivery, Chief. Emergency work order. You guys got a rodent nest in the sub-level cooling ducts. HVAC sensors are tripping. Unless you want the servers to overheat and melt by morning, we gotta get in there." She held up a clipboard. On it was a work order she had forged on the printer back at the brownstone. It looked official, stamped, signed, and urgent. The guard frowned, glancing at the paperwork, then at Damien. Damien forced himself to slouch, wiping a hand across his nose, trying to channel the exhaustion of a man working a graveyard shift. "I didn't hear nothing about rats," the guard grumbled. "That's 'cause they're in the vents, not the lobby." Catherine deadpanned. "Look, call your supervisor if you want. Wake him up at 3 a.m. to ask about rat traps. I'm paid by the hour, I can wait." The threat of waking a supervisor worked, as Catherine knew it would. The guard sighed, handed back the clipboard and hit the gate release button. "Make it quick. Service elevator only." "You got it," Catherine said. She drove through. As the gate closed behind them, Damien let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "You are terrifyingly good at lying." "I'm not lying," Catherine said, parking the van in the shadows of the loading dock. "I'm just telling them what they expect to hear. That's how Greg got away with this for so long. He showed people exactly what they expected to see, so they never looked closer." They grabbed their tool bags, filled not with hammers but with a laptop signal, scramblers and a canister of industrial coolant, and headed for the service elevator. The ride up to the 50th floor was agonizingly slow. The elevator rattled and groaned, counting off the floors. 10, 20, 30. "When we get out," Catherine instructed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We have to move fast. The night patrol sweeps the executive floor every hour on the hour. It's 3:15. We have 45 minutes before they come back around." "The server room is behind the conference hall," Damien said. "But it's biometrically locked. Retinal scan. My credentials are revoked, remember. If I look into that scanner, it won't open the door. It will trigger a silent alarm to the NYPD." "I know," Catherine said. She patted the heavy tool belt at her waist. "That's why we're going to trick the building into opening the door for us." The doors chimed and slid open. The 50th floor was silent. The plush carpet swallowed their footsteps. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but the office felt like a tomb. Damien walked past his own office door. He saw his nameplate, Damien Cross, CEO, and felt a surge of anger. Greg Pinter was likely sitting in a comfortable chair somewhere, perhaps even in this very building, waiting for the stock market bell to ring, so he could finalize the theft of a lifetime. "Here," Damien whispered, pointing to a set of heavy frosted glass doors. The main server node. A red light blinked on the retinal scanner next to the door. Catherine dropped to her knees and opened the tool bag. She didn't pull out a computer. She pulled out a specialized glass cutter and a suction cup. "I can't hack the retinal scanner," she explained quietly. "It's hardwired to the security grid. But the door handles, they rely on motion sensors on the inside to let people out. It's a fire safety requirement." She sprayed a circle of freezing foam on the bottom corner of the glass door, muffling the sound. Then, with surgical precision, she scored the glass. Scritch, scritch. She tapped it gently. A perfect circle of glass popped out into her hand. "Reach in," she commanded. "Wave your hand in front of the inside sensor." Damien lay on his stomach. He shoved his arm through the hole into the cold server room. He waved his hand blindly. Click. The magnetic lock disengaged. "After you, boss." Catherine smiled. Inside the room was a refrigerator. The hum of the servers was deafening, a wall of white noise. Rows of black towers stood like soldiers, their blue LEDs blinking in a hypnotic rhythm. This was the brain of cross-global logistics. Trillions of bytes of data flowed through these cables every second. Catherine wasted no time. She plugged her laptop directly into the maintenance port of the central terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, the clatter of keys lost in the drone of the cooling fans. Okay, I'm in the subsystem, she muttered, eyes scanning lines of code reflecting in her glasses. But Greg, he's paranoid. He has the Orion 7 ledger behind a black box. Encryption. It's isolated. If I try to copy it, the system will lock down and wipe the drive. So we're stuck? Damien asked, looking at the door nervously. No, Catherine said. Hardware has physical limits. If the server core gets too hot, the system triggers a safety reboot. For exactly 10 seconds during that reboot, the encryption shields drop to protect the data integrity. I need those 10 seconds. She pointed to a large red wheel on the wall, labeled Emergency Coolant Override. Damien, I need you to shut off the cooling fans, manually. If I do that, the processors could melt, Damien argued. Or, Catherine countered, we catch a thief. Turn the wheel. Damien grabbed the cold steel wheel. He grunted, heaving it to the right. It shrieked in protest, then turned. Immediately the roar of the air conditioning died. The silence was sudden and heavy. Then the temperature began to rise. It wasn't gradual. Without the industrial cooling, the massive server racks began to radiate heat like ovens. The air grew thick and stifling within moments. Temperature rising, Catherine called out, typing furiously. 100 degrees. 110. Come on. Red lights began to flash on the ceiling. Warning, thermal critical. Catherine, it's getting too hot, Damien yelled, wiping sweat from his forehead. Hold it, she shouted back. Wait for the crash. Suddenly the hum of the hard drives pitched down. The lights on the towers flickered and died. The room went pitch black. Now, Catherine screamed in the dark. Damien heard the frantic clicking of her keyboard. Bypassing firewall. Locating Orion directory. Copying. Come on, Damien urged the darkness. Got it, she yelled. Turn the fans on. Turn them on. Damien spun the wheel back. The AC roared to life, blasting them with icy air. The emergency lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a dull red glow. Catherine yanked a USB drive from her laptop and held it up. The smoking gun. Every transaction, every forged signature, the IP address of Greg's shell company. It's all here. Damien slumped against the wall, laughing in relief. We did it. We actually did it. Slow clap. The sound came from the doorway. Damien's blood ran cold. He turned. Standing in the open doorway was Greg Pinter. But he wasn't alone. Flanking him were two men who were definitely not building security. They wore dark tactical gear and held compact submachine guns at the low ready. Greg looked impeccable in a tuxedo, holding a half-empty glass of champagne. He looked like he had just come from a gala, which he probably had. Bravo, Greg said, his voice dripping with condescension. I have to admit I'm impressed. The overheating the core. Trick that is vintage hacking. I haven't seen that since the 90s. Greg, Damien said, stepping in front of Catherine. It's over. We have the drive. Greg took a sip of champagne, unbothered. Damien, you still think this is a movie where the good guys win because they found the clue? Look around you. He gestured to the armed men. I have the building. I have the board. And in about 2 minutes, I'm going to have that drive, Greg said pleasantly. And you two industrial accidents happen. Tragic gas leak in the server room. Very sad. The market will mourn for a day, and then they'll look to me for stability. Greg's face hardened. The mask of friendship dropped, revealing the rotting envy underneath. I spent 15 years fixing your mistakes, Damien, cleaning up your messes while you took the magazine covers. You think I'm going to let a waitress and a has-been CEO stop me now? He snapped his fingers. Kill them. Bring me the laptop. The mercenaries raised their weapons, the barrels leveled at Damien's chest. Damien braced himself, ready to charge, ready to do anything to buy Catherine time. But Catherine didn't move. She didn't scream. She didn't cower. She laughed. It was a sharp, loud sound that echoed in the small room. Greg frowned. You find death funny, Ms. Hale? No. Catherine said, stepping out from behind Damien. She tossed the USB drive into the air and caught it. I find you funny, Greg. You're so obsessed with being the smartest man in the room you forgot to check if you were the only one playing the game. What are you talking about? Greg snapped. Catherine tapped her cheap digital wristwatch. The USB drive is a decoy, you idiot, she said, her voice cutting like a razor. I didn't just copy the files. I set up a script. The moment the system rebooted and the encryption dropped, my laptop didn't just save the data. It broadcasted it. Greg went pale. Broadcasted where? To the SEC whistleblower portal. Catherine said, stepping closer to the men with guns, entirely unafraid. To the FBI Cybercrimes Division, and just for fun to the glowing tip line of the New York Times. She checked her watch again. The transmission finished 3 minutes ago, which means the file is currently sitting in the inbox of about 50 federal agents. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the mercenaries looked uneasy. They looked at each other. Shooting a trespasser was one thing. Being accessories to a crime that was already in the hands of the FBI was another. She's lying, Greg whispered, his voice trembling. She's bluffing. Am I? Catherine challenged. Check your phone, Greg. I'm sure your Google alerts are screaming by now. Greg fumbled for his smartphone with shaking hands. He swiped the screen. The light from the phone illuminated his face and the sheer, unadulterated terror that washed over it. No, he gasped. No, no, no. From far below, piercing the thick glass of the tower, came a sound. Woo, woo, woo. Sirens. Not one. A swarm. Damien Cross stepped forward, putting a hand on Catherine's shoulder. He looked at his former friend, his CFO, his betrayer. You were right about one thing, Greg, Damien said softly. The market hates instability. I think your arrest is going to cause quite a dip. The mercenaries lowered their guns. They heard the sirens too. One of them looked at Greg, then at the door. We're done here. I'm not fighting the feds for a paycheck you can't clear. They turned and walked out, leaving Greg Pinter alone, holding a champagne glass that suddenly felt very heavy. Run, Greg, Damien said, echoing the words he had shouted at the bus driver hours ago. But I don't think you have anywhere left to go. The wail of the sirens grew louder, a cacophony that pierced the thick glass of the Cross Global Tower. Down below, red and blue lights washed over the wet streets of Manhattan like a chaotic tide. In the server room, the silence was deafening. Greg Pinter stood frozen. The arrogance that had defined him for decades, the sneer, the posture, the absolute certainty of his own untouchability cracked. He looked at the guards. They were private contractors, ex-military mercenaries, paid for discretion and intimidation. They weren't paid for life sentences. Boss, one of the guards said, his voice tight. If the feds are downstairs, we're done. I'm not shooting a billionaire and a witness with the FBI in the lobby. Shut up, Greg shrieked. His composure shattered completely. I pay you. I own you. Get the drive. The drive doesn't matter, Greg. Damien barked, stepping forward. He shielded Catherine, though she hardly needed it. She was standing tall, staring at the man who had ruined her life with a look of pure, icy vengeance. The email is sent. It's over. If you harm us now, you add murder to a list of charges that's already going to put you away for the rest of your natural life." Greg looked at the gun in the guard's hand, then at the door, then at the window. He looked like a trapped rat. The elevator chimed down the hall, heavy footsteps, shouting. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The guards didn't hesitate. They placed their sidearms on the floor and put their hands behind their heads. They knew the math. Cooperation meant a plea deal. Resistance meant death. Greg Pinter slumped against the server rack. He looked at Catherine. "I destroyed you," he whispered, his eyes vacant. "I buried you. You were nobody." Catherine stepped out from behind Damien. She walked right up to Greg, stopping inches from his face. "I was never nobody," she said, her voice steady and loud enough to be heard over the approaching agents. "I was the person doing the work while you were drinking the champagne. And you forgot the first rule of accounting, Greg." "What?" Greg breathed. "Everything," she said, "eventually balances out." The doors burst open. Agents in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in yellow stormed the room. "Greg Pinter, Damien Cross hands where we can see them." As the agents swarmed the room, cuffing the guards and grabbing Greg, Damien raised his hands calmly. He looked at Catherine. She was trembling now, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She looked at him, tears of exhaustion welling in her eyes. "Is it real? Did we actually get him?" Damien watched as Greg was hauled up, handcuffed, and read his rights. The CFO was weeping, babbling about a setup, but nobody was listening. "Yeah," Damien said, a genuine smile breaking through his grime-streaked face. "We got him." The next 48 hours were a blur of flashbulbs, depositions, and lawyers. The scandal was the biggest Wall Street story since Enron. Cross Global CFO arrested in billion-dollar fraud scheme. The headlines screamed from every newsstand and flashed across every ticker in Times Square. Damien Cross was cleared of criminal wrongdoing thanks to the time-stamped logs Catherine had secured and the dead man's switch email that clearly identified Greg as the sole architect of the fraud. However, Damien's reputation was battered. The board of directors was in a panic. The stock took a nosedive, shedding 15% in a single morning before stabilizing. But amidst the chaos, a different narrative began to emerge. The press loved the mystery. Who was the anonymous whistleblower? Who was the source that brought down a titan? Damien sat in his penthouse 3 days later. The sun was shining, a stark contrast to the rainy night that had nearly destroyed him. He was watching the news. Bennett Street John was on the screen. The arrogance deal had been voided. Bennett retained his company, and with the discovery of the hidden assets Greg had stolen, arrogance was suddenly solvent again. Bennett looked 10 years younger. "I owe my company's life to Damien Cross," Bennett told the reporters. "He could have buried the evidence. Instead, he did the right thing." Damien turned off the TV. He felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't done the right thing, not at first. He had been dragged into doing the right thing by a woman he had tried to fire. He looked at the file on his coffee table. It was a background check. Not a criminal one, but a professional one. Catherine Hale, magna cum laude Wharton, senior analyst Sterling Voss, certified fraud examiner. She wasn't a waitress. She was a prodigy who had been erased by a corrupt system. He picked up his phone. "Pierre." "Yes, Mr. Cross." The voice of the maitre d' trembled. "I need a reservation for tonight. Table 1. And Pierre. "Yes, sir. Do not clear the restaurant. I want it full. I want everyone to see." Catherine sat on the edge of her bed in the small Queen's apartment. Her phone had been blowing up with calls from reporters, but she hadn't answered any of them. She was packing. She had done what she needed to do. Greg was in jail. Her name would eventually be cleared in the court proceedings, but the process would take months. She was tired. She thought about moving to Chicago, maybe starting over where nobody knew the name Hale or Miller. A knock at the door. She froze. Not again. "Who is it?" she called out. "Room service," a deep voice replied. She frowned. She opened the door a crack. Damien Cross stood there. He wasn't wearing the coveralls or the soaking wetsuit. He was dressed in a charcoal grey tailored suit, looking every bit the billionaire. But he was holding a white takeout bag from a corner deli. "May I come in?" he asked. Catherine hesitated, then opened the door. "You're a little overdressed for this neighborhood, Damien." "I bring peace offerings," he said, setting the bag on her tiny, scratched table. He pulled out 2 coffees and 2 bagels. "It's not steak, but it's honest." Catherine chuckled. It was a dry, tired sound. "What do you want? You're free. You're the hero. You don't need me anymore." "That's where you're wrong," Damien said. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, looking out at the brick wall of the adjacent building. "I spent the last 3 days in meetings with my board. They want to hire a new CFO immediately. They have a list of candidates. Safe men. Boring men. Men who will never tell me when I'm about to walk off a cliff." He turned to her. I threw the list in the trash. Catherine sipped her coffee. "Okay, and I want you," Damien said. Catherine choked on her coffee. "Excuse me. I want you as the CFO of Cross Global Logistics." The room went silent. The hum of the refrigerator seemed incredibly loud. "You're crazy," Catherine said, shaking her head. "I'm a waitress. I'm a disgraced auditor with a revoked license. The board would eat you alive." "Let them try," Damien said, his eyes flashing with that familiar intensity. "I own 51% of the voting shares. I can hire whoever I want. And I don't want a yes man. I want the person who looked me in the eye when I was being an arrogant jerk and told me I was wrong. I want the person who broke into my own building and outsmarted a criminal mastermind in under 10 minutes. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Your license is being reinstated," he said. "My lawyers fast-tracked the appeal with the state board using the FBI evidence. You are Catherine Hale again, and I'm offering you a starting salary of $800,000 a year, plus stock options." Catherine stared at the envelope. It was everything she had lost, everything she had worked for. "Why?" she asked. "Why go this far? You could just write me a check and say thank you." Damien's expression softened. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had held the wheel of a delivery van, the hands that had been dirty with grease. "Because that night at the restaurant," he said quietly, "you were the only one who saw the truth. Everyone else saw a billionaire. You saw a fool about to lose everything. You saved me, Catherine. Not just my money. You saved me from becoming him." He gestured vaguely, referencing Greg. "I need you to keep me honest," Damien said. "Will you do it?" Catherine looked at the contract. Then she looked at the man. He wasn't the predator she had served water to. He was a partner. "I have conditions," she said. Damien smiled. "I expected nothing less." "First," she said, counting on her fingers, "no more phantom freight. We audit every department. Complete transparency." "Agreed." "Second, you apologize to Bennett St. John, personally." "Done. I already called him." "And third," she said, a mischievous glint returning to her eye, "you have to learn how to pour your own water." Damien laughed, a real hearty laugh. "Deal." 6 months later, the Gilded Grid was buzzing. It was a Friday night, and the elite of New York were packed into the dining room. At table 1, the atmosphere was different than it had been on that rainy Tuesday. Damien Cross sat at the head of the table. To his right sat Bennett St. John, who was laughing at a joke. To his left sat Catherine Hale. She looked stunning. She wore a sleek black dress that commanded respect, her hair loose and shining. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was the CFO of the most powerful logistics company on the East Coast. Forbes had just run a profile on her, the waitress who saved Wall Street. The maître d' approached the table with a bottle of vintage wine. He looked nervous as he approached Catherine. "Madame Hale," Pierre said, bowing slightly. "For the table." Catherine looked at Pierre. He was the man who had fired her, who had grabbed her arm and thrown her out into the rain. He was sweating. Catherine smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, but it was a smile that said, "I remember." "Thank you, Pierre," she said graciously. "That will be all." Pierre exhaled, relieved, and hurried away. Damien raised his glass. "To new partnerships," he said. "To reading the fine print," Bennett added. "To listening," Catherine said. They clinked glasses. Just then, a young waiter approached. He looked terrified. He was balancing a tray of appetizers, and his hand was shaking. As he reached to place a plate of oysters down, he wobbled. A single oyster slid off the ice and landed with a wet plop right onto Damien's expensive suit jacket. The table went silent. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. People turned to watch. They expected the explosion. They expected the yelling. The young waiter went pale. "Oh my God, sir, I am so sorry. I... Damien looked at the oyster stain. Then he looked up at the boy. He saw the terror in the kid's eyes. He saw himself from 6 months ago, and he saw Catherine standing in the background. Damien picked up the oyster with his napkin and set it aside. "It's okay, son," Damien said gently. "Accidents happen." "What's your name?" Michael, sir," the boy stammered. "Well, Michael," Damien said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out $100 bill. "Go tell the kitchen to send out another round, and keep the change." The boy's jaw dropped. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." Damien watched him go. He turned back to the table. Catherine was watching him, a look of immense pride on her face. "What?" Damien asked, feigning innocence. "Softy," she teased. "I'm just protecting my investment," Damien said, winking. "You never know which one of them might be a genius in disguise." Catherine laughed, and this time she didn't have to hide it. She took a sip of her wine, looking out over the room she used to clean from the seat of power she now occupied. She had spoken up. She had lost everything. And in the end, she had won it all back. Because in the game of life, the devil is in the details, but the victory belongs to those brave enough to point them out. And that is the story of how Damien Cross learned the most expensive lesson of his life, that a uniform doesn't define a person's worth, and that sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one refilling your glass. Catherine Hale went from being silenced to running the show, proving that integrity and a sharp eye for detail always wins in the end. So here is my question for you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone in power? Did you speak up or did you stay silent? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss the next part of our saga. Thanks for watching, and remember, check the fine print.